Hello, and welcome to Storytime Sunday. Today we will be reading from Village of the Small Houses by Ian Ferguson. Turning to page number 91, this is the beginning of chapter 6. There was a large pile of dirt in our front yard. The dirt was there because my father had finally decided we needed to drill a well. Until then, we had been getting water from our water from Frankie Flett, the waterman. Nobody called him Frank or Mr. Flett. He was Frankie Flett, the waterman, and he was the only provider of water in Fort Vermilion, unless you lived in a teacherage or at the experimental farm, that is. Then your water came from the aqueduct system, an apparently random series of leaky pipes. Whoever had installed them didn't seem to know that water is supposed to run downhill, which meant little water pressure and frequent sewer backups. The Romans may have invented plumbing, but the Fort Vermilion system seemed to have been designed by Visigoths. My father came to his decision to have a well dug after watching Frankie Flett, the waterman, load up one day. Frankie Flett, the waterman, had a flatbed wagon, which was pulled by two enormous Clydesdales. The one with a white patch on its face was called Daisy, even though the patch of hair looked exactly like a 5-point star. We all thought Star would have been a better name. The other horse was simply called Horse, because Frankie Flett, the waterman, had never bothered to name it. We figured it deserved a name of some kind, so all the kids in town called it Clyde. The team was well taken care of, and they were an impressive sight. The Clydesdales were by far the largest animals in the area. Domesticated, that is. A full-grown bull moose would probably have come close in size, and the bison that occasionally wandered up from Wood Buffalo National Park were larger, but you didn't see them pulling carts or plowing fields or otherwise doing an honest day's work. The wagon the horses pulled had room for 12 water barrels. These were old oil drums that had been cleaned out. Before the roads to Fort Vermilion were improved, before tanker trucks could safely make the trip year-round, diesel fuel and gas were delivered to our area in 50-gallon metal casks. Once these were emptied, they were up for grabs, and everybody had one sitting outside their house for collecting the rain and for Frankie Flett, the waterman, to fill up. You made sure they were clean by burning off the insides, then scrubbing them out with lye. They may not have been the most sanitary receptacles for drinking water, but they worked fine. Frankie Flett, the waterman, would show up at our house on a regular basis. He would back his team up and then use the 5-gallon pail to empty out one of the water barrels into ours. He didn't keep to a particular schedule. He seemed to know when your water supply was getting low, and he'd stop by to replenish it. He charged 50 cents a barrel on delivery, and he didn't extend credit. 45 gallons of water would last a couple of weeks, depending on how much cooking was being done, how many kettles were being boiled for tea, and how many baths were being taken. Our family bathed every Sunday night, boiling the water on the stove and then filling a deep, square sheet metal tub that would be wrestled in from the yard. There were now 6 of us in the family. My youngest brother Billy had been born 3 years earlier, and baths were taken youngest to oldest, which meant my mother and father spent those years washing in tepid gray water. We also had a sponge bath every morning. That was face, ears, armpits, and feet. My brothers and I weren't too fond of the weekly hot water cleaning, but the morning cleaning was worse because the water was cold. Frankie Flett, the waterman, considered us good customers, since we used way more water than most of the people in town. Many families bathed on a less frequent schedule. 50 cents was a lot of money. Frankie Flett, the waterman, filled his barrels in the Peace River. There was a trail down to the river by the factor's house that the Hudson's Bay Company had built back in the 1930s. When water and power became available in the early 1950s, the Hudson's Bay had built a new house for their store manager and abandoned the old one. It had sat empty since then, but no one had ever broken into it or vandalized it in any manner. The windows still had all the original glass, and a tree branch snapping off and landing on the back porch had caused the only damage. My father had noticed Frankie Flett, the waterman, taking his wagon down the hill to the river one afternoon. He was glad to see him, since he wanted to arrange for an earlier delivery. An outbreak of head lice in the community had my father concerned, and he planned to increase the frequency with which our family bathed. He had also picked up some medical shampoo that was supposed to prevent lice, and the instructions on the bottle said to use fresh water with each application. This all meant using extra water, and that was why my father followed Frankie Flett, the waterman, down the hill and saw for the first time the process he used when filling up his wagon. He walks the horses right into the river, my father said, and loads the water from the back of the wagon. Yeah? Okay, said Bud Payan. And we're going to skip a few pages because he gets a little sidetracked with a different story, up to page 98. That means the horses are upstream. Sure. Bud, he's getting the water downstream of where horses are. Yeah? Okay, said Bud Payan. I think everybody knows that, Hank. Bud, I'm going to hook up to the town water. If you think that's a good idea. All right, I'm asking you what you think. Because the town water comes from the reservoir. The town water supply came from a concrete basin at the top of the hill. There was an old chain link fence around it, most of which had given in to gravity. I'm aware of that, said my father. They pumped that water right up from the river. My father could tell Bud Payan was working his way around to telling him something. They use a big diesel pump, said Bud Payan. It's pretty loud. My father didn't say anything. He'd learned from experience that when Bud Payan was working his way around to saying something, questions threw him off track. It's the exact same water Frankie Flett, the waterman, brings you. Without a horse added, my father said, hoping this wouldn't derail Bud Payan. You ever thought about putting in a well? Now, why would I want to do that? The town water comes from the reservoir. Bud Payan was starting to repeat himself. This meant he finally was leading up to something important. My father waited, silently, for the penny to drop. You know Ted Cardinal, him? The little wiry guy with no teeth? No, that's his brother, Tim. The tall, skinny guy with the broken nose? No, that's his cousin, Tom. The one with the funny eye? That's the one. Well, said my father, what about him? He works for the town, eh? Okay. He came by my place, him. Right. Anyway, said Bud Payan, me and Ted Cardinal? Yes. Last week we pulled a dead cow out of that reservoir. A snippet from Village of the Small Houses by Ian Ferguson. See you next week.